I can say so much about Brett, but I'm just going to introduce him in a very brief way. But I hope he takes heart in what I'm saying. My the women in my family have so much place in my heart, and my grandma had the best saying: "Show me who your friends are, and I'll show you who you are." So I'm just going to tell you some of the people that Brett Bursey surrounds himself with. Becky Robbins is the communications director. She's managed the Networks Foundation since 1996. She has a special relationship with Brett, but she's also one of the smartest people in messaging in the progressive wing of our party. He's surrounded by Vince Matthews, a public interest lawyer who's their policy analyst, who works with nonprofits and agencies all over the state. He focuses on citizen redistricting and maintains a policy portfolio that is expansive and all of us would be impressed with. He has people like Dr. Robert Greene running the amazing, and I mean amazing, Modjeska Simpson School for Human Rights. Dr. Greene is a huge influential figure, not only in Claflin University, but also in the spirit of telling the history of South Carolina in the way it should be told, with the unvarnished truth and the ways in which systematic oppression was held upon communities within our state. He has people like Miss Marjorie and Kyle, the co-chairs of his board. But Brett Bursey has been a fighter his whole life. He originally went to the University of Georgia. He worked on organizing by fighting against the gubernatorial candidate in Georgia, moved to the University of South Carolina at Beaufort, then eventually moved to the University of South Carolina, where he began to implement and focus on Building Grow, which was a program and an institution that was involved in making sure that civil rights and human rights were at the forefront of change in South Carolina. Brett took over in 1996 as the founder of the South Carolina Progressive Network. Brett is someone who speaks his mind and someone that I'm so excited to get to know better through this process. So Brett, I know I can talk about you for days. I hope I gave you some justice on your introduction, and I really appreciate your time and the fight that you've done for all of us in the.
Well, thank you, Al. I appreciate it. And Conway's right that we've had a reasonably long relationship, and I find that Conway does a good job. We've had some differences in opinions, and the latest one I actually feel that we won in terms of people getting to register from their and vote from if they live on campus somewhere. But other than that, the relationship that we've had with the Greenville County Board of Elections has been quite good. And one of the things that just drives me crazy, and I'm sure makes Conway pull what hair we have left out of his head, is that people with the social media today being your main source of information, if something bad happens somewhere, you think it's happening here. And so I mean, we get calls from people that are reasonably intelligent legislators about how we've got to ward against what's happening in Georgia. You can't do what's happening in Georgia here. We register for life in South Carolina, and there are only a few reasons you can lose that. And so the purges and the caging, they call it, when you can do like a direct mail and then go into Conway's office and tell him that these people have moved. It's not that easy in South Carolina. So we have to pay attention to who made the rules of the game we're playing. And let's call democracy a game because it helps understand it. And we need to know who made the rules in order to be able to play the game, who benefited from the rules when they made them, and who benefits now. And this is part of what we teach in the Modjeska School. Elle mentioned that, and it's one of the, it's foundational that you can't solve problems unless you understand them, and you can't understand them unless you study them and unpack them. And one of the things that is a reality in South Carolina is that the Constitution that we're operating under was written in 1895 with the express purpose, clearly expressed and articulated loudly, purpose of disenfranchising black people. And when that Constitution passed, Tillman apologized to working white people and poor white people, because he said that be consistent with the 13th and 14th Amendment, which was then federal laws, had to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater in the sense of diminishing the ability of people to vote by having all kind of laws about literacy and poll taxes and things like that. And though we have historically had a system that goes way back, I think Columbia in 1824 was one of the first towns to have voter registration in America. And they would post the name of the white male citizens that owned property over 21 years old on the courthouse door, and they're the only ones that could vote. And so voter registration itself kind of it shows you who's running the game, and that this is the only advanced democracy where you have to register to vote. I mean, what's the difference between a citizen and a registered citizen? That's to prevent people from voting. But voter registration has always been used to prevent people from voting. And we have a situation now where that you take the voter's oath and you sign the voter's oath and you swear you're abiding by these things and that you get to vote. And over the years, I think we did one in 2000 and another one in 2010 where we called all 46 county election offices and talked to the voter registration person and asked them what they did in a series of questions about how you let people vote and what 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 issues you have with, say, someone not having an address or someone who is a former offender, and that there were 13 counties that answered the question about former offenders, ex-offenders, correctly. Greenville was one of them, and the correct answer is they take the voter oath, they pass the test. And the rest of the counties, they had some qualifying concern about somebody that had a criminal record having to prove they don't have that criminal record. We see one of the big flaws in that is that the voter oath also says you can't vote if you're crazy. And they don't make people prove they're not crazy. I mean, if we did that, it would even depress the turnout more, and certainly the number of legislators that couldn't vote. And so that there is no consistency in terms of enforcing some of these laws, and that the and there's also nobody that keeps up with it. It's one of the things that we've found over the years in terms of trying to figure out how to fix things. Trying to get something through the legislature to make it easier to vote is very difficult. That we had a number of efforts to try and have uh, ex-offenders have a welcome back letter, and it hasn't worked. But we've found that we can go through an administrative process and try and clean up the way that the election commission knows who's been had their rights restored. But the bottom line on I believe on practicing democracy was pretty well articulated by George Washington in his farewell address. He said, "Don't start parties." I'm paraphrasing now. This isn't exactly what George said, but he said, "Don't start parties. If you do, you're going to end up with two that fight amongst themselves for money and power, and they forget what their mission was." George is right, and that one of the realities in the United States of America and South Carolina in particular is that um, the strength of the voting in South Carolina has been controlled by in the beginning in 1785 when the Constitutional Convention was the South Carolina delegation was the one that created the three-fifths compromise where people of color were only had three-fifths voting power because they wanted to count the enslaved people as citizens in the redistricting, so they got more allocation of House of Representative members, and that that's never changed. That's never changed. We saw um, certainly by the 1895 Constitution um, the diminution of black voting and black people being elected pretty much completely. There were no black elected officials in South Carolina from 1900 until 1970. And I was at the University of South Carolina in 1966, and we, we that was I guess it was on the it was after the Orangeburg Massacre, which was in '68, that we had a protest at the university about the Confederate flag, and we marched that we demanded that the university quit using Dixie as a fight song at football games and sporting games and waving the Confederate flag. And President Thomas Jones agreed, and we thought we really were something. And we marched up to the State House, and it was then I realized well, there's no black people here except the people that clean, empty the trash cans. And so it wasn't until 1970. This is like a 70-year period from 1900 to 1970. There were no black people elected. And when I was growing up, the white supremacist party was the Democrats. Don't forget that. And so what the commonality now, we have a white supremacist party that's the Republicans. And so the commonality has been money and power from jump. And if we don't understand who made the rules, we can't figure out how to win the game. And so I want to see if I can share my screen here for a second. And we'll look at this one. This is a real quick snapshot from Ballotpedia of the change from 1970, when black people could vote and elect somebody, till 2000, when things started shifting by race. And there were a white flight from the Democratic Party over to become Republicans, but also the redistricting has everything to do with it. We'll get to that in a minute. But you can see that the Republicans have controlled the House since '94. That's when young David Beasley woke up and found himself a Republican one morning, and he got to be governor. And it wasn't until 2000 that the Senate became Republican. But look at these numbers. This is 2020. This is the last one. 43 Democrats elected. And you can register all you want to. You can turn out all the votes you want to. The best you can do is change who's sitting in that seat. The opportunity to change a seat from Democrat to Republican is pretty slim. There's about 17 seats out of 170 that are within a 10-point range of being able to be competitive. And so we're the progressive network has been more and more articulating that we're not our educational foundation, which is our 501(c)(3), which is supposed to be nonpartisan. We've decided we're anti-partisan. We agree with George Washington that it's the partisan nature that has screwed things up. And the big money is going to ride whoever wins. One of the things that we look at is money, which equals power, and power which contributes to the building of money. And that when you look at campaign contributions, you'll see that, and I can use the Nelson Mullins firm and the Riley Scarborough firm from your very own Dick Riley up there. That those two law firms, if you watch their political contributions, they max out to both parties. They don't lose, and so as long as you've got enough money to ride all the horses, you're gonna win. And when I was making good trouble in the '70s and the '80s. The reality of the largest political forces in South Carolina, you look at the money. The largest political contributions in the decade of the '70s and the '80s were nuclear waste and toxic waste. It's because we lost our industrial capacity and decided that the way to do it was to take the things that were being run out of the North because of environmental concerns. Now, this is a snapshot of the Greenville legislative delegation that I think this is probably an aggregate of 2016 and 2018, because 2016, prior to 2020, was the last time you had the senators elected. 2020 was an anomaly. There was a lot of turnout and a lot of competition, but nothing changed because of redistricting, because we've been redistricted by race. And now what has happened is that people of color share values with people that believe in democracy and equal justice. And so they all get kind of stuffed into a pact, as they call it, packed into a political district. And that you see here that you don't have much of a chance of winning a race in Greenville if you don't have any primary opposition. And
We
using
can't see the full screen.
you can't see the full screen. Oh, let's see. I'm screen sharing. I'm sorry. I have to stop share and start share and change the one we're doing. There you go. Now do you see the legislative delegation?
Thank
Okay. And so this question of who wins, you can't just say, well, like my Republican legislator does in Lexington County. He doesn't understand gerrymandering at all. Brett, we just have to get more people registered to vote. No coach. He's a coach that's taken my seat from Rick Quinn, who was indicted. That it doesn't matter how many people you turn out in a district that is been gerrymandered to be a certain way. And as you can see, these races are heavily weighted for Republicans in the Greenville area. We've got three Democrats, and there's virtually very little opposition anywhere here, with people winning by 98%. Now that's been the average. In 2000, there were more people turning out. There were more candidates. But if you break it down and look at the upsurge of Democratic opposition, everybody's going to run. We got to have somebody run every race. If you look at the money, those races that the Democrats ran in, the feudal ones, like the one where I live, where there wasn't even a Democratic candidate for 28 years, you can run, but you don't raise any money and you lose. And we would need to recognize that. And so we we arrange the deck chairs, but it's the same people sitting in them, or the same party sitting in them. And so that is a rather depressing reality. And so we have to organize around not partisan basis, but shared values. What's the Commonwealth? And we have to have competitive political districts where the winner has to represent people that don't look like them. How novel. And that would contribute to democracy, which gives rise to this thing called civilization, which we are falling further and further and further behind in the world. And the the way that we have redistricting working now, it was 1965, the Voting Rights Act established uh, the preclearance procedure, where history states with a racist history like South Carolina and most of the Confederacy, any change to voting laws had to be pre-cleared by the Department of Justice. And so remember that was 65. Remember there weren't any black elected officials in 65. And so up until 2013, it was in 2014 was the first election, we had the Department of Justice looking over the shoulder of the legislatures that would change a voting rule. And for instance, the photo ID bill. The photo ID bill in South Carolina was the only photo ID bill that DOJ refused to clear. And that's because we, the Progressive Network, working with uh, a Dr. Brenda Williams in Sumter, who's a friend of democracy. Dr. Williams is an elderly black doctor. Her husband's an elderly black doctor, and their patients are elderly black people, and they've been there 50 years. And so she knew people that were born at home that didn't have a birth certificate. And we were able to find a dozen people that couldn't vote under the rules that were being proposed. And so we intervened in the pre-clearance process, and DOJ said, no, you can't have that law. And Nikki Haley appealed, spent nearly $4 million of our money fighting it. And it went to the appeals court in Washington. And the opinion of the appeals court was that they rewrote the law in situ and they changed it and the wording on page 2 of the order, which I'd be glad to send anybody, says the Act 52 that South Carolina has passed is not the one we're ruling on today. The photo ID bill in South Carolina does not require a photo ID to vote. And Conway will back me up on this. We have what's called a reasonable impediment. And so this whole circular thing was designed to accomplish the purpose of suppressing the vote by confusing people. And so we quit arguing. See, Georgia and Texas had passed photo ID bills before it came to South Carolina because they didn't have any parties that were impacted. But that process is over with. The Supreme Court ruled in 2013, Shelby v. Holder, Shelby County, Tennessee versus Eric Holder, that, oh, we're post-racial. If we got a black president, we don't need this anymore. So this is the first redistricting ever that we're going to let the majority party draw the rules, that we don't have the opportunity to intervene on them before they take effect. There's no more preclearance. We can fall back on Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which talks about the willful suppression of votes as opposed to the effect of it, and make an argument that when you pack people into districts, then you diminish the strength of their vote. Like, for instance, Clyburn's district is easiest to see. When we had 6 congressional districts, we had 1 Democratic electable seat. And so with a third of the people of color in the state, 3 into 6 is 2. So when you add a new congressional district, it looks like you should have maybe two districts that are winnable. And all the Democrats had 2. All the Republicans had 1. And guess who won? The majority party. And that the only set of maps, this is 2010 now, the only set of maps that had no majority black districts was the ones that Gilda Cobb introduced that we worked with. And the people were like, what do you mean? We can't, we got to have black districts. The creation of super districts, well, like Clyburn's running up around 60%, is excess. Well, the efficiency gap is what Justice Stevens called it. He could finally see how partisan gerrymandering actually had a racial effect by the fact that you have more people than you need to win. Everybody can vote, but it's not going to change anything. See, there's 500,000 registered black voters not voting, and the Democratic Party that she was the last example of of when I met with Vince and showed him 250,000 people that were registered voters that had their Medicaid denied. And I said, Vince, you knock on these doors, you can be governor. He said, I can't touch Obamacare. He had to go out and win 5% of the Republicans that didn't vote for him when he ran against Nikki the first time. He only lost by a little over 4%. And he blew it. He didn't go after the people who he shared values with. He went after the people who disagreed with him about health care to try and change their minds. And so that there have been like a perceptual misunderstanding on the part of Democrats as to who you try and reach out to. And what we've got to do is organize around common values, because there are a lot of Republicans that have potholes. A lot of Republicans can't afford health care. There's also 250,000 Republicans that live in black districts, and they have nobody to vote for but black people. And so without a competitive basis in your elections, you're going to end up with people like we have in the 2016 races, is that 51% of the legislators, the last time prior to 2020, we had the Senate and the House on the ticket. 51% of the legislators were elected in the Republican primary with 8.6% registered voters. That's not what democracy looks like. And so, talk a little bit about what we're looking at coming up with redistricting and what we can do about it is not much. I'm afraid that we're going to come out of it with not much change. What we can change is people's understanding of how rigged the game is, and that one of the things that we can work on that isn't going to happen this year unless we make it happen is identifying your own community of interest. What does that mean? Because it's been a mystical process of redistricting. It's really actually quite simple. You know, a 12-year-old could do it with a type of computer equipment we have now. What's hard is gerrymandering. You know, when somebody doesn't want a certain subdivision in their district and they carve it out. And so that type of surgical precision is done behind closed doors, and they're going to be already starting doing it now, because they were looking at preliminary numbers coming back first of the end of May. The end of May, there'll be preliminary numbers coming out without the geospatial data that you can use to move people around, but you can see the diminution of the increase of population. And so the legislature is going to start moving stuff around. And what you have to do is to start having discussions in communities like, is your community cut in half? Who cut it in half? Now, what about the school districts? And one of the really simple ways to kind of measure equality and democracy is look at education. And that we have districts where there are poor districts because of a county school boards being drawn in such a way is it maybe a black district. And then the white people don't want to pay taxes there, or they leave, they put the kids in private schools. And so the effect on your communities is really, in a large part, on zoning and local money budgets and bond issues determined by that redistricting. And so there had been this sense that, oh, you put all these black people in there and they get to elect somebody. Well, yeah, but they can't change anything. And so that there are these systemic problems that go all the way back to the beginning that we have to recognize to be able to deal with them. We're going to have to organize outside the system. Now, I am, I've been a delegate to every Democratic convention since '78. And I have been a thorn in the side of the Democratic Party, the corporate Democratic Party, because of its institutional short-sightedness in terms of holding what power they can. And that I'm for a democracy with a small d, and we need to organize within the Democratic Party the people that understand what we're doing. We started a progressive caucus, Gilda Cobb Hunter and I did, in 2002. We were the largest influence group in the convention. The largest component of the Democrat Party is black women. And I see my good and old dear friend Lillian Brock Fleming is with us today. And so the idea that we could actually insert democracy into this rigid structure that was pretty much run by older white guys um, was rather unsettling to the Democratic Party. And so between 2002 and 2014, we were a force that could challenge the party and win a floor fight. And then in 2014, they rewrote the bylaws of the Democratic Party to create caucuses with the idea that they're supposed to be promotional tools for the Democratic Party. That's not the purpose of caucuses. The purpose of caucuses is to reflect the position within the party and fight for that position. So you now have the Progressive Caucus and the Rural Caucus, but you have to support the candidates that don't support the platform. And that's not the way it should work. And so there's a lot of institutional problems within there that you need to be a player. I try and get young people to go be a delegate. You can't change it unless you're a player. But the idea is building the power outside the system to change the system. You can't use the system to fix the system because it's rigged. And so I'm going to quit talking now and see if anybody's got anything that they want to ask me or challenge me on. The Progressive Network now is 25 years old. And as Elle said, it grew out of a group called GROW, the Grassroots Organizing Workshop. It was in the mid '70s, and I was Majeska Simpkins' lieutenant for the last nearly 20 years of her life. And there's a really interesting program that we're doing with the Majeska School that's open to the public this coming Monday about this really wonderful, rare period of time in South Carolina when the eyes of the world were on it in 1940s, right after World War II. That I won't give away the punchlines, but the guy that wrote the book Death Blow to Jim Crow is our guest speaker. And I would encourage, if you're not doing anything next Monday, this coming Monday at 6:30, to tune into the link that I put in the chat box. So, El, you want to take some questions?
Yeah, but really quick, I know we have two elected officials. I know Miss Glenda is getting off, but I want to highlight Miss Glenda before she gets off. Miss Glenda's on our school board doing the hard work that you're talking about, Brett. So before Miss Glenda Morrison leaves, I would just want to highlight her and thank her for all of her amazing leadership and for her friendship to the party. Brett, we have some great questions. And Miss Lillian, I'm going to come to you too after we get some questions into Brett. Brett, talk about what you think the For the People Act can do for South Carolinians, specifically South Carolinians that are voters.
Well, I mean, there's very little that we can do to affect federal law. And then you're talking about the bill in U.S. Congress.
Yes, sir.
It saddens me for people to get all excited about calling Lindsey Graham or my congressman, Joe Wilson. It's not going to do any good. And one of our old sayings within our work in the Progressive Network is we can't change DC till we change SC. So we have to work on local angles. I mean, it's like the difference between organizing around universal health care or Medicaid expansion is that Medicaid expansion is controlled by the governor of South Carolina. So if you can find a local hook to a national issue, then that's a legitimate thing. But I don't, I have no idea that we could improve the quality of life in South Carolina by trying to get Joe Wilson to vote for is that the number Bill one S1 or HB1? I can't remember which it is.
Yes, sir. HR1. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
And so, yeah, I think it'd be a great idea. It was one of the, we'd belonged to a group for a long time called Why Tuesday. Why do we vote on Tuesdays? And it's got, Conway may have a better answer than it, but it's got something to do with when you take the wagon to market and when you have time to get home and whatnot. But it's clearly, we have a very, very difficult voting methodology for the citizens. And the reason is the citizens are like patsies in the game. And so we should have making it easier to vote. And that one of the good news things is that the bill that is somewhat restrictive is Mr. Newton's bill in the House, but it's a Republican bill that takes away some of the good things about absentee voting and excuse voting and whatnot, but establishes a 14-day period of early voting. And so we've never had real early voting. We've had early in person with excuse. And so we've never really held people to the excuses until it became obvious that a lot of people were using excuses. And so there's a push to end the excuses. But the good news is that the Republican bill that is now a bill that would remove some of the value, the easiness of voting, actually recognizes the significance of Conway being able to do his job easier if he's got 14 extra days to do it. I know that Alan Clemens, the fellow that was the sponsor of the photo ID bill, he had a bill one time that would do away with everything except paper um, absentee voting, and so we could all vote on the same day as a show of patriotism. And so that was asking Conway. Conway, you got 30 days to do your job now, but for no more money, we're going to give you 12 hours. And that was one of the times when the organization that Conway's a member in, the South Carolina Association of Registers and Electors, called SCARE, they were afraid of us for the longest kind of time. But when they realized we're actually trying to make their job easier and we want to get them more money to do their job, and we really do have a pretty good electoral system. But that, I don't know, I drifted off on that. Ask another question now.
No, no, that's no, you're no, Brett. I like you. You make me laugh. I like you. I like your candidness too. One of the things that I think, especially younger folks in our party, in conversations I have, struggle with, Brett, is that challenge that you've dealt with in your career. How do you stay true to your progressive values, but also keep a balance of you live in a two-party system, basically, and these are the binary options. And I say that because a lot of younger people came up to me this past election cycle and said, I didn't get on board with Hillary in 2016 because I wanted a different type of policy. In 2020, I realized maybe I'm not going to get everything I want. I have to make a choice. How do you balance that? And what information or advice can you share with younger folks in our party that also deal with that struggle as well?
Well, it's one of the things we have to be honest about things. I mean, we have our missing voter project that we've been doing since '04, and we're looking at the 500,000 people of color that are registered non-voting. We've got about half the people in South Carolina that would be eligible in a 4-year cycle that aren't voting. And so none of the political operatives go after the non-voters. And so we do. And when they say we don't vote because it doesn't do any good, we agree with them. And we ask them to join a movement that's going to work outside that system to change that system. And it's going to be a hard, long job, folks. I mean, we have a plan to be able to change redistricting. Right now, if the court's not going to save us, because they said that it's up to the states, and that we can't expect the majority party to give up power, what are we left with? And so we have a plan that we've hatched that's going to take what we haven't had, which is leadership, bipartisan leadership from Republicans and Democrats. We've almost had it um, to be able to call for using a local petition drives. Say in Greenville, if you got 360,000 voters, you'd need 15% of them to be able to pass a county ordinance that says the voters, and see, or the Constitution allows the county voters or city voters to do something we can't do statewide. The only states that have taken power completely away from legislators to draw the lines are states where people could put a ballot initiative on the state ballot and change the Constitution. We can't do that in South Carolina. Most states can't do that. 27 states can't do that. But there's this way that we could use local initiatives to take up petitions in a county, in a legislative district, your legislative district, where because of gerrymandering, the diminution of participation means that we could get more people to sign a petition that the county council shall pass. You get 15% of the people to sign something and submit it. The law says the council shall pass it or put it on the next ballot to vote on. Well, if you've got more voters saying we demand that the politicians let the people draw the lines instead of the voters get to pick the people, at some point the politicians are going to realize you've got more votes than they do, and they're either going to get on board your train and say, "Oh yeah, let's let the people draw the lines, and we'll just have to be competitive, and we'll just have to vote for at least a common sense center where we agree that most of us have things of share in common." So it can be done. There is a plan. It's a long plan, and I want to point out that we still haven't passed the Equal Rights Amendment in this state. And how long did it was 70 years black people couldn't vote. And so today, the young people today, they want to like push a button, boom, happens. No, it ain't gonna work that way. I think that this redistricting that's coming up, people are going to understand if we work hard and don't get much change, they're going to understand the situation we're in. And there's like a death knell of democracy. And that we're seeing this rise of new nativism, they call it, stone cold racism, and that the reality is becoming starker. And so it is a great time to organize. It's a dangerous time. And so I would tell young people, it's very difficult to look at the system to see implement your values. One of our sayings is, "You're the first front in your own revolution," and we believe and organize around the revolution of values that Dr. King called for. And so we need a shared community that shares those values, and that's what we're building. Not the Democratic Party Incorporated that is stuck in this box that it can't get out of. And I know a lot of Democratic legislators that there's no cohesiveness, there's no party discipline. Even the party bylaws say we have to support candidates that don't support the platform. So it's not like in advanced democracies where there is a party line that everybody agrees with and you vote for the party line and they implement it or you're out of the party. It's everyone for themselves because they can't win anything. So there's no cohesion. So they grandstand. And so when the young legislators come in, they either that there's nobody there to help them, there's no cohesiveness, and none of the older legislators really want the young ones to grandstand and get ahead of them. And so all you have to do to be a Democratic legislator is beat your chest and fight hard because you can't win. And so that's a circumstance that we've got to recognize. Oh, I don't know if that came close to answering your question, but I think being honest to people and telling them that we've got to work outside the system helps.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your views, Brett. I know you've been in the fight for a long time. I want to do another plug. I am a current student of the Majeska Simpkins School. I am enjoying it. I am learning from not only the incredible instructor, the cadre that they have, but also the students that they picked. It's a real diverse network of people with various backgrounds, but with passion for issues in the community. So I want to do a plug for that. I'm enjoying it. And Brett, I really appreciate the opportunity that you've given us to come and share on this Saturday.
Well, people need to know that this is something that I do and the Progressive Network does all the time. And you can just, if you type into your browser of your choice, South Carolina Progressive Network, you'll find us. And we're flexible. Your tactics and your strategies have to fit where your feet hit the ground, which is why we're not focusing on Washington. We're focused on South Carolina and focusing on yourself to be able to understand, live, and embrace the values that you want to see in society. Thank you, Al.